The 19th of July, 1973, a man walked onto the set of Enter the Dragon and never walked off, not the way he came on, anyway. His name was Raymond Cho, not the producer, the other one, a stuntman, a fighter, a man who had spent 15 years convincing himself that Bruce Lee was a myth, a marketing invention, a carefully engineered illusion designed for Western audiences who needed heroes packaged in something exotic. Raymond believed that what people called greatness was lighting, editing, camera angles, and good publicity. He believed that if you stripped away the lens, you stripped away the legend. He was wrong, and by the time he understood how wrong he was, the understanding had already begun to undo him. What happened to Raymond was not loud, not dramatic, not the kind of ending that makes headlines. Hong Kong in the summer of 1973 had quieter ways of correcting men. The city was restless then, British on paper, but ruled in spirit by money, ambition, and shadow economies. The docks answered to the triads, the studios answered to risk, and the future felt as unstable as scaffolding in a typhoon. In the middle of that tension stood Bruce Lee, not just a star, but something more unsettling, proof that a Chinese actor did not have to stand silently in the background of Western cinema. After The Big Boss, after Fist of Fury, after Way of the Dragon, he had become a force that even the skeptics could not ignore. Now, with Enter the Dragon, backed by Warner Bros. And produced through Golden Harvest, he was stepping into a space that had never fully opened to Hong Kong before. Doors were not being knocked on, they were being removed from their hinges. For most people on that set, this was history unfolding. For Raymond, it was something else entirely. A threat to a belief he had carried his whole life. Raymond was born Cho Kin Man in Kowloon in 1941, second son of a fish merchant who worked the Aberdeen floating markets. The smell of brine and diesel, the slap of wet rope against wood, the sharp arithmetic of bargaining, these were the textures of his childhood. He learned early that the world did not reward softness. By 8, he had decided that life divided itself into those who took and those who were taken from, and he would not be counted among the latter. He did not learn martial arts in a formal school. There was no incense, no bows, no philosophy handed down gently. He learned in stairwells and alleys where rules were invented on the spot, and survival was the only curriculum. He grew fast, hit hard, and developed a reputation that cleared space around him. It was not admiration he earned, but caution, and he mistook one for the other. In every room he entered as a young man, he made sure he was the most dangerous presence. It became his identity, the socket his sense of self plugged into. When he found work in the film industry as a stuntman, it was not out of artistic passion, but practical logic. The industry paid cash, asked few questions, and rewarded physical risk. If you could fall convincingly, bleed convincingly, and get up without complaint, you were useful. Raymond became useful. Good at falls, good at brawls, good at absorbing impact without flinching, but never extraordinary. There was always someone faster, someone cleaner, someone whose training gave them an efficiency Raymond could not replicate with brute will alone. That gap irritated him, but he explained it away. Talent was a story people told to justify inequality. Strip away the spectacle, and everyone was bone, muscle, and fear. That was what he believed until the afternoon he watched Bruce Lee rehearse alone through a crack in a partition wall. He had not meant to spy. He was killing time between setups, cigarette burning low, irritation simmering about pay and scheduling. Then he heard a sound that did not belong to staged combat. Not the heavy thud of choreographed strikes, but a slicing whisper, the sound of air being displaced at speed. He looked through the narrow gap and saw Bruce alone in rehearsal. No cameras, no applause. What he witnessed unsettled him in a way no opponent ever had. The speed was startling, yes, but speed alone was not what froze him. It was intention. Every movement carried purpose. No gesture was decorative. There was no wasted motion, no flourish for imaginary applause. The body moved as if it had been refined through fire until only the necessary remained. Raymond felt a sudden irrational anger rise in him because what he saw could not be dismissed as performance. There was no audience to perform for. The myth existed even in private. He stepped back, pressed his shoulder against the wall, and breathed hard, aware that something inside him had shifted. He would spend the next months trying to reverse that shift, trying to prove to himself that what he saw was illusion, but doubt had already been planted. It took favors and quiet persistence for Raymond to secure a place in the stunt roster for Enter the Dragon. He arrived early, left late, made himself indispensable in small, invisible ways. Props were moved before anyone asked, schedules smoothed. Younger stuntmen shown how to fall without shattering wrists. He stayed at the edges of frames and the edges of conversations. Then came the corridor sequence, the first crack in the tension that had been building inside him. The choreography was straightforward. Rush in, exchange blows, go down convincingly. Raymond altered his angle slightly and threw a real punch, not with murderous intent, but with the desire to test reality. Bruce's response was almost imperceptible, a fractional shift of weight, a minimal deflection, and Raymond's own force carried him into the stone wall. The impact rattled his teeth. The director called cut, and no one commented, but Bruce looked at him directly for the first time, not past him, not through him, but at him. Raymond told himself that being noticed was victory. It was not. The following morning, he arrived before dawn under the excuse of professionalism, though he knew it was obsession. He wanted to see Bruce without witnesses, without mythology. He found him sitting cross-legged on the rehearsal room floor, perfectly still, eyes closed, as if the room had formed around him rather than the other way around. Raymond did not understand stillness. In his world, silence meant defeat. Yet this silence felt dense, deliberate, alive. When Bruce opened his eyes and simply said, "You're early," it was without suspicion or arrogance. They warmed up in parallel, speaking little. Something about that quiet hour unsettled Raymond more than any strike could have. Over the following weeks, he studied Bruce with methodical attention. He watched how he interacted with director Robert Klaus, how disagreements were handled without ego, how crew members were addressed by name. He watched how injured stuntmen were checked on personally. It disrupted Raymond's hierarchy of the world. Stars were supposed to remain distant. Bruce moved through levels of status as if they did not exist. The confrontation came on a quiet Thursday when the set emptied early. Raymond struggled with a spinning kick that refused to land correctly. Bruce appeared and offered a correction. Adjust your weight, lower your heel, let the turn come from the floor. It was technical, neutral, even generous. Raymond rejected it reflexively. "I didn't ask," he said. Then the words he had rehearsed in his mind for weeks surfaced. "You're good on camera. Without it, you're nothing." The air shifted. Two stuntmen in the far corner froze without meaning to. Bruce smiled. Not the public smile from posters, but something smaller, almost private. He removed his training shirt and folded it neatly. He did not argue. He did not defend. He simply said, "Show me." The exchange that followed lasted 40 seconds, though Raymond would replay it for 31 years. He launched the kick with all the force of accumulated resentment. Bruce was not there when it arrived, not because he retreated, but because he had already moved. The counter was minimal, precise, corrective rather than punitive. Raymond felt 2 points of pressure, and then the floor struck his back. It was not a fight. A fight implies exchange. This was a statement. Bruce crouched beside him, and in the same tone he had used earlier, said, "Your weight was too far forward." No triumph, no mockery. Then he stood and walked away. Raymond lay staring at the ceiling, conducting an autopsy on his own certainty. For decades, he had believed that greatness was packaging, that the gap between himself and the remarkable was artificial. Now, that belief lay cracked beyond repair. What unsettled him most was not the defeat in Bruce's response. His challenge had not even registered as threat. It had been corrected, like posture. He avoided the set for 2 days, shoulder bruised, pride fractured. In his rented room, he revisited memories of dockside fights, of a brother praised for brilliance and lost too young, of a life built around being the most dangerous man present. He understood that identity had just been unplugged. When he returned to set, he did not return as challenger, but as student, though he would never use the word aloud. On July 20th, 1973, Bruce Lee died at 32. Enter the Dragon released days later and changed global cinema. It would turn Bruce into symbol as much as man. Raymond attended the funeral from a distance, close enough to feel finality, far enough to remain invisible. He expected the old resentment to surface. Instead, he felt something quieter: obligation. Raymond Cho died in the spring of 2004, 62 years old, in a modest apartment facing west toward the harbor. His landlady found him seated in an armchair, as if he had simply paused mid-thought and never resumed. On his desk lay a photograph from Enter the Dragon, Bruce frozen mid-motion in a corridor the camera could never quite capture fully. On the back, in Raymond's handwriting, were 4 words: "He was right. Carry on." Between 1973 and 2004, Raymond never became famous, never closed the distance he once resented. But every morning before dawn in that small apartment in Aberdeen, he stood on the same worn patch of floor and moved. Not for audience, not for myth, not to prove anything to anyone. He moved because he had once discovered that the extraordinary was real. And once you discover that, There are only two choices: deny it or work toward it. Raymond, the man who endures, chose to work.